So before we launch into the conversation, I just want to say a little bit about the incredible work of Firedup4. So Firedup4 is a ceramics auction and charity fundraising to give young people access to clay. In 2020, Kate Malone invited 31 potters and artists to donate ceramic artworks for the first Firedup auction, which raised over £100,000. The fund successfully furnished and provided teaching equipment and staffing for 2 pottery studios on OnSide Youth Zones in Chorley and Wigan, Lancashire. Over the last year, these spaces have delivered after-school classes to young people who have seen positive benefits from accessing the calm and restorative nature of clay. This year, the Firedup4 auction returns with bidding launching today. So there's 63 fabulous ceramic artworks available for bidding online at MAAK Contemporary Ceramics, and you can see those, they're part of the slideshow. And they've been donated by 56 artists, including Barnaby Barford and Rich Miller here today. And the funds raised in this year's auction will go towards providing pottery studios at 3 more OnSide Youth Zones across the country, and that's in Dagenham and Barking, Barnet and Warrington. So Firedup4 believes in the makers of today for the makers of tomorrow. So I think that's a really good starting point for the conversation, for you all to dig into your pasts when you were a past maker of today thinking of being a maker of tomorrow, and about your first exposures to clay, your first experiences of clay. I mean, Rich, let's start with
Sure.
you.
Well, mine wasn't actually until college. So, well, I say that. I had a very brief go with clay at school, and I think the image might well come up somewhere, much to my horror.
Wow! Intimidating.
And it's not that either. But I think it was just, for me, it was just, I loved anything creative. I think as a kid, I just got kind of lost in it. In making, and for me, clay just provided the perfect medium, because there was sort of infinite possibilities. It could become anything, and because it was a bag, it was mud, it was just this lump of inanimate kind of dirt. You didn't feel precious. I think there was sort of some materials that were perhaps difficult to kind of step into or work with when you're young, because you feel like you can't spoil its perfection. But clay, it's just a bit of mud, infinitely recyclable until it's been fired. So you learn not to be precious, and you can just fashion anything. It's a direct connection between your ideas and your hands. You can make anything. I don't know what yours was, Barnaby.
Mine was a Saturday art class. I must have been 6 or 7. My sister went to a cookery one, and I went to an art one, and we did clay. We did clay, and I still remember it. I still really remember, blobbing slip onto things, and even press moulding. And I think I've got a picture of like one of the seven dwarfs that I made, and it's. I mean, my kids come to the studio and we just get a bag of clay out, and we don't do it enough, but they respond to it in a completely different way to pretty much everything else.
Yeah. So what about the tensions between the relaxation of forming and then anxiety, or possibly not, of putting it into the kiln? Because that's always a moment, isn't it, when you're opening that kiln door at the end to see what's happened.
Yeah, there's always that, but I mean, I think that's the thing that's so magical about clay, is that it teaches you life lessons, because actually you learn to be resilient, you learn to be tenacious, because it doesn't always work. So actually, whilst you're kind of completely consumed and absorbed in a process, you are actually learning skills that kind of extend beyond the studio, because if you don't have those, if you don't learn to be resilient, then it's going to be a very short-lived career. But I think for young people and adults alike, that's one of the joys of the material. There's kind of a rhythm to working with it that you can be fully immersed in. And things get thrown up along the way. You have to kind of work with it. You can't work against it. But that's the joy, really.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, obviously I didn't go on to be a maker in any way at all, but I did work with clay as a child, much like Barnaby, who had a Saturday morning club that I used to go to. And every other week we'd be the group was split in 2, and half of the group would be in the kiln rooms and in the pottery every other week. And I used to love it. And I didn't go on to pursue an art career, and actually it's complete coincidence that I now find myself working in ceramics, because it wasn't a link through for me. But at the same time, it was something that, for my childhood, was a hugely important part of what I did and loved very, very much. So it's funny to kind of be back here working in ceramics after a big break of having nothing to do with it at all.
and you must really see, ceramic artists develop from their early career through.
Well, I probably see it more from a collector's perspective, and because as an auction house, we're dealing with the secondary market. So actually most of our engagement is with collectors who kind of build collectors, and a lot of them will be buying directly from the makers, but also, there's this whole vibrant secondary market as well. So I get to see more how people go on to live with the ceramics beyond kind of when they've been made by the artists, and the different hugely varying kind of collections that people form and how they choose to live with it. And I think living with these handmade objects it's a beautiful thing, and it's a wonderful opportunity for people to have things like that in their home and around them.
I think as sort of child growing up, just it's quite. I think what happens now is a lot. Just thinking about you sort of people making and selling. It's a thing, right? You think, oh, if I kind of go on this route, but I think when we were younger, which is changed a lot, is that there would just be a doing it for the sake of doing it. And now I feel that, seeing students and seeing younger people, there's a lot more pressure on something leading to a job.
Yeah, rather than
leading to or just making for making's sake, or learning for learning's sake. And I think that's I think that's quite a good thing to sort of, starting young, and starting making young, because there's no pressure. You're making because it's fun to, because it's just fun to make.
Something at the end of your hour.
Massively.
Something that started off as a lump of nothing and has, with your imagination in your hands, turned into something at the end of it. And I think it's hugely rewarding. That's the only reward you really need from it at that point.
So in terms of the first collectors, because which you were talking about that early piece that you made that still exists in your life, is it that our relatives, our friends, or that person that you gave your first piece to are kind of like the first collector of your work, and these things it's kind of
mums.
Exactly. Your mums as collectors. I mean,
become the custodians, don't they, of all the things we wish to hide and never see again, perhaps,
and displayed.
So it's kind of discussion before, didn't we? And we realised that all of our parents had still kept on display those very first pots that we made as children, which was quite a funny idea, really.
Definitely, but there is a lovely permanence to it.
Yeah, there is.
Kind of, and a direct connection. Like at the time, it obviously meant something, this piece that I was making, but goodness knows what I was thinking. I can't remember what it was I was thinking, but there is a very nice sort of direct connection to that moment in time, that I would have been there fashioning this object with my 12, 13-year-old hands, which is quite special somehow, and it's nice to sort of be able to kind of reflect on that. And I think that permanence is something that you kind of lack, and that the reality to the object is something you kind of lack in a digital age, which is so fast paced. There's something real and tangible at the end of it. I asked my daughter B what she loved about clay, and she said to me, you can make anything you like with it, and then you can play with what you've made for ages afterwards. No concept of how long that ages is. It'll be a few thousand years, if not more. But I just love that the permanence to the things that are made is quite special.
And you spoke earlier about the imperfection as well of it, and how much do you feel that kind of embrace of the imperfection of the ceramic medium is what's making it sort of more accessible to young people? Do you think that it's something where people can just really embrace their creativity and everything has a merit?
I mean, but I don't know really. I just think it's. I think that's even like a later discussion. I think there's. I mean, I don't make anything out of clay at all now. Really, I've always sort of really from early on worked with sort of industrial ceramics, and but there's still something about just picking up a piece of clay and making something out of it, and then cutting something off and then sticking another bit on. And I just don't think that a lot of that, especially when we talk about young people, that it really, that it really matters. It's just doing, like the act of doing.
And just the exposure that it gives people, the opportunity to make something. And I think, but that's the hope of the OnSide Youth Zones, is by building these studios, is that the huge amount of children that, that will get an opportunity to do something that they otherwise never would. And I think that sense of satisfaction of having kind of taken nothing and turned it into something, that in itself is, hugely rewarding and gives a real sense of purpose and achievement. And if you can give access to that to as wide a range of children as possible, it doesn't need to lead into a career in ceramics or anything to do with it. It's about that moment of achievement. And I think that little spark can inspire children into a million different directions, and it doesn't have to be linked to the clay. It's what that sense of achievement does.
I was just going to say, it's like Barnaby was saying earlier, it's that kind of making for making.
Exactly.
And the material doesn't discriminate. It's and whatever you're making, however you approach it, you are lost in that moment for that period of time that you're making that thing. You forget all else in life.
I mean, I think we sort of talking about mental health as well. I mean, because I've been making things forever, you don't really realise it. And actually, during sort of 2 years of, sort of lockdown and stuff, making stuff, you just carried on because you're just carrying on making. And it gave, it was I was quite conscious about how, because I was making things all the time, that I felt absolutely, I felt fine, because you're still kind of producing, you're still, achieving, or you're not, achieving's the wrong word, but it's, you're outputting. And once I think that kind of does something to you, sort of settles you, when that process of outputting.
I mean, it's kind of complete freedom, isn't it? I mean, there were so many regulations and lockdowns and things you couldn't do. But when you're making, you're kind of completely free to explore your own mind, your own concepts, ideas, imagination. So I think it can be a very freeing process. I certainly find it that. And equally, I can kind of explore themes and things that I perhaps couldn't explore in maybe conversation or in other ways. Or in reality, it's just a completely sort of. But I think, as a young person, you're not necessarily expressing such complex thoughts and needs.
No, just doing. Just outputting stuff is really. I think it's really important. And to have that. I mean, we were talking before here about how I've got 2 children at primary school, and one's just about to go to secondary school, and. It's been, stripped out of the education. I mean, I said to, how much art do you do a week? None. Because, all right, it's in other things, and they have to do some drawing for this and some, but there isn't art as a subject. And it's, it's really difficult. You'd think that as creative parents, my wife's a designer, we'd be sort of really on it at home and doing loads of stuff, and it's we don't have we don't find that we don't have the time, they don't have the time. I say just draw, just draw, that's my sort of baseline, just draw, but it's we find it difficult to kind of do it all, so, and we've got everything at our fingertips. So it's so important that, because we can say just draw and then we're drawing, but it's like so many people don't have that opportunity. So I just kind of think that anything to get even a little bit of exposure. We all remember that first time that you did something.
I mean, let's talk about the issue of art education as well. So Kate Malone has herself talked about how few kilns are still in schools, and there's a quite startling quote from her about when she studied ceramics at Bristol Poly in the early 1980s. There were more than 50 ceramics dedicated BA courses. Now in the UK, there are 2 fully dedicated ceramic courses. So that's quite a startling decline, both in what's happening in schools and then continued into further education. So do you think it's important to have art in a formal setting? Because you were saying how difficult it can be in an informal setting to get round to the business of art.
I mean, I think it's absolutely essential to see it as its own entity. Right, we're doing art, and as valid as maths and English and this. We're sort of, I think, the way the curriculum's gone, we're teaching our kids to be sort of rubbish robots when robots are really good at being robots. And what a robot's not very good at is creativity, and so that needs to be sort of front and centre in my eyes from sort of primary school, really.
Any other
and I think it's just unfortunate that ceramics requires equipment. Very often there's fear of that equipment. It's expensive to run, to maintain. So I think often it's first to go out the door because it requires space for these kilns to inhabit. But equally, I do believe that doesn't mean it can't be part of those core subjects, because you don't necessarily need a kiln to manipulate clay to have interactions with clay.
You could just make it.
You could just make it.
You don't need to fire it.
Exactly. Or you can find, there's potters, there's makers everywhere. And I think any maker would feel invested in the future of other makers, or just to give people a chance to have a go. So I think there are other ways of accessing the equipment that's required. I'm going into B school in a couple of weeks' time, and we're going to make stuff with the kids, and then I'm going to take it away, I'll fire it and take it back, so they can still kind of be aware and part of that process. And there seems to be no lack of desire from teachers, but it just seems like a really rigid curriculum and a really sort of a situation where actually the finances and economics of making ceramics viable in school is kind of, it means that it's the first thing that kind of gets mothballed because of all of these sort of bits on the periphery that people feel are required, but actually aren't, just to kind of, explore the virtues of the material.
And I think giving children an opportunity to excel in something beyond the kind of core curriculum. Not everyone is highly academic. Not everyone's going to exceed at kind of maths and English and the other subjects. And if you can then have creative subjects that are seen as on a par with the core curriculum, that children who can excel in that still have something that they're really contributing and being, that's as valid. I think it's huge for their confidence. And I think if it can't be done at present within the core curriculum, that's what makes it so important in the OnSide Youth Zones, that children are still getting access to those kind of facilities and those opportunities to explore that side of their personality and their abilities.
But it should be the core curriculum.
Absolutely, it should be.
It should be, and it's it's really, I think it's really, really problematic. Like I think a lot of issues with sort of learning disability. Well, learning disability, I got a real problem even with that. It's because it's this really tight structure of the curriculum that it doesn't allow for these people that think differently, or look differently. My son's dyslexic, and it's only through going with him and looking at all of that I've sort of realised it's like, oh right, yeah, I am too, and it's just like, oh right, but there's, that's not a learning issue if.
It's just a different way of learning.
It's just a different way of looking. And it's like that different way of looking is, we need more of that.
But I mean, equally, you've got to empathise with teachers. Classes of 32 or 33 kids.
I understand that.
It must be so difficult to, I drop me off at school and there's 32 other kids, 6-year-old kids going into this room. I just think how they get anything done. Get any kind of creative.
No, I certainly don't blame the teachers. I certainly don't blame the teachers, because I mean, it's, you have to deliver whatever's, you have to deliver, but it's,
it's a call out to ministers here today. Reform the education system. Okay, so could we talk a bit about art and industry then? Because a lot of what we've spoken about has been like the artist potter, if you like, although that's somewhat an old-fashioned term. But then ceramics is a huge, there's been a huge industrial market in ceramics as well, which in some ways you sort of span the two, because things like tiles, the medium of tiles, is something which is can be both artistic but industrial as well.
Yeah.
And there used to be vast numbers of jobs in this country related to the ceramic industry, which has also been in decline. So just wondered about those tensions between the artistic and the industrial, and I suppose Barnaby, your work as well. But Rich, if we start with you and the idea of
it is definitely a tension. I think it's one of those situations where, because young people aren't accessing the sorts of skills that are required in many of the small businesses, much like the one I run, you consequently then have to go through the process of training people because there aren't real skills being taught, certainly in the ceramics industry. There are a few places that are doing that now. Clay College, for example, is one of those. But, I think it's a very difficult sort of place to exist, because you kind of want to invest in people, you want to invest in training and skills, but equally it's very... It's a market that's being squeezed, like I think many small businesses are being. You sort of exist in this space where you're making things for domestic spaces, very often with people who are designing schemes very driven by budgets, it just becomes an exercise in sort of managing money and skills. But it's a very difficult place to exist. But I strongly, I'm holding it on to it with everything I can, because I really strongly believe that there's sort of skills that are valid, that are kind of useful to society more broadly. And we're, certainly with the tile making, we're sort of working in ways that tiles have been made for sort of hundreds of years. So although it's almost a kind of a working museum. I sort of feel like we're almost becoming a working museum, because we're sort of, we're trying to keep skills alive. But all of these things are they're about people, they're about knowledge. They're about hands, about sort of real making skills. And I think, mechanisation has a place, and the things that factories are producing and people are designing for industrial production are incredible. And it's the reason we lose out on loads of work. And I don't in any way mind that, because they're doing incredible things. And technology is an incredible industry in its own right. But I do feel like actually that connection to the material and people and skills also has a valued place, even within those industries, those mechanised industries. So, tension is probably the best word. I couldn't have summed it up any other way. It's just a tough environment.
Yeah, I don't know, I've got a different experience of it, because I've been working with factories for years. Even the first work that I was making when I left the Royal College was working with industrially produced figurines that I cut up and stick back together again. And then I've worked with factories throughout, and sort of because I work with thousands of individual pieces in a lot of the sculpture work. So I've sort of worked with factories here and factories in China and factories in Italy, and I think that the general decline in this country is, it's across the board in manufacturing. That's the same narrative as everything. But it's globalization has sort of changed the nature of manufacturing. But it's, there's still people in this country, I'm still working with 1882 who have a factory up in Stoke, and they're making incredible things. It's skills and people wanting to do that job, really.
And Marijke, in terms of the market, is the market strongest for artistic production, or what?
Well, certainly that's where we focus on. So we focus on studio ceramics. So it's very much about the handmade and the individual. And it's been really interesting, actually. We kind of touched on it, but didn't quite get there in the earlier discussion, where obviously that real need to make during the pandemic when everyone was kind of locked down. And I think conversely, for a lot of collectors, there was this really overwhelming desire to acquire and live with things that had been made by hand. And we saw a huge amount of architects, certainly in the first lockdown, the number of people, kind of new people coming to us and registering for our auctions and buying ceramics. And I think there's an element where the accessibility of the price point is so great that you can be buying an individual artwork, made by a really big name in ceramics, and you don't have to be spending tens of thousands of pounds. It can be quite accessible, it is quite democratic, but you're buying something that's unique and being made by someone's hand. And I think there was this real urge to it was like that human connection that you get, here's a handmade piece of earth that has been made by an individual and then is shared and passed on to a collector who gets to hold it, who gets to handle it and live with it as well. And I think ceramics in a weird way filled that slight void that we had in the lockdown, where people were connecting through something that had that real human connection. And so, there has been, I think the markets for studio ceramics has grown significantly in the last 5 years. But I think particularly over the last 2 years, and I think it's just filled a bit of a void for people. And I think that human connection that you get through a pot has played a big part of that, for sure.
Yeah. So do we sort of feel that ceramics are almost, and especially their role in the home and living with ceramics, it's almost like a spiritual experience in that?
Yeah, I think it's that vessel that can contain so many things. I think sometimes it's the object itself. Sometimes it's what that object presents, be it the relationship that you have with the potter as a collector, because a lot of collectors do form really strong relationships with the makers themselves, and so the two almost go hand in hand, that people love an artist's work because they also love the artist and have the relationship with the artist. Sometimes it's more aesthetic and it's that instinctive reaction to the artwork itself, and that's very visceral and very instinctive. And sometimes it's part of a more academic exploration where someone is trying to kind of tell a story of, the development of studio ceramics over a period of time, or groups of artists who work together. And so it's difficult to pinpoint because it's so individualistic and it's such a different process for so many different people. But I think it's that versatility that draws people into ceramics, because you can tell so many very different stories depending on where you're coming from.
I think I think people have got it's a sort of different material. We do eat off it every day, and we do drink out of it every day, and we do go to the loo on it every day. And
a lot of people live in it.
But you see people walking around, you see people with ceramics, and it's quite interesting. Because people go and, where you're not allowed to go somewhere, you're not allowed to touch things. People go and touch it.
But you can't help it.
You can't.
I'm awful in a museum because I'm used to touching it.
But people will just go and, it's a different. I don't know. It's a different sort of material.
And I think that's what draws people in, though. I think because it's been touched to be made, and it just invites you to do the same. I think I find it almost impossible. But then I go for the really tactile things myself. That's what I'm really drawn to.
So to focus in on the handmade, we've got a piece in real life today by Tiana Bryce, age 9, who has been attending Inspire Youth Zones since October 2020. And Tiana has signed her name inside the fairy tea house pot that we've got here on display, because she's saying making clay made her feel like she was at home. She said, I like the feeling of the clay. It's really relaxing. I love coming here so much. I got a potter's wheel to use at home. So she's both making at home, but then the whole act of making has made her feel at home, which has translated into this very visceral signing of the name inside. And we were talking about the complexity of materials and how much you need to make ceramics. But then Tiana's story kind of brings it home in that she's managing to do this production from her own.
Wasn't she also, when Kate told me the story, it was like a real heart-wrenching story, wasn't she? Did she not? She was homeless, wasn't she?
I think she was. Was she a
she
child
didn't have
in
a home,
care?
or she was sort of going between
Yeah,
it was really like when Kate told me, it was like, oh God, you know, it was really, so I mean, it makes it even more, you know, even more profound.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. But I suppose it's that, because do you make from studios, or are you making from your own homes, or have you ever made from your own?
Yeah, I started on my kitchen table, and then the spare room, and then another spare room, and then it wasn't until my wife was pregnant that I thought better move out. So yeah, which also allowed a sort of change in scale of work too. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I make from a workshop. All of the tiles are based there, the kilns, all of the equipment is there, and then I've got a shed in the garden, so I sort of make tiles all day, and I go home and make pots or work all evening, and that does tend to migrate down into the house, much to the family's dismay, mainly at high level because there's lots of dogs and animals running about. But yeah, it definitely, I would say, surrounds me when making. But you know, they're two different headspaces, the tile making and my own work. I go home and that's my release. It's my kind of me time, I guess. But yeah, so a bit of both for me.
Yeah, and we've spoken about lockdown and also about how making clay can be that real release. Has there ever been sort of breaks where you haven't been making, or your creativity's been disrupted, and have you sort of felt the difference of that, or have you been making constantly?
I make constantly, but then it's not. I'm not ever sort of making one thing, you know. Like I do lots of different, you know, sort of drawing and painting and sculpture and video and lots of different things. So I do all the time.
Yeah, likewise actually. I mean, if I go away on holiday for a week, I get itchy fingers. Drawing will satisfy so much for me, but it's really the material, you know, I miss, because it's such a big part of my everyday. I mean, now that with the tile company, there's only 2 of us, and we're processing sort of 4 tons of clay a month between us. So you know, a lot of clay is passing through our hands, and then evenings. It's just something. Yeah, I feel addicted to, and I feel I really need in my life. You know, and I do feel a hole if I don't have it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what inspires you? So how do you get over a creative maker's block, if indeed you've ever had one of those?
Well, much like Barnaby, I think, you know, I've always got lots of different things, different projects on the go. So I'm picking things up, putting things down all the time, testing things out. I mean, there's so many facets to a ceramic practice. So whether it's kind of glazing, whether it's the raw materials itself, the forms you're making, how you're making them. So there's always things bubbling away, and I'm always dipping in and out of them. So I rarely have a block. I'm sort of the best procrastinator, you know, the never-ending projects, kind of never quite there. But you know, I'm always sort of picking things up and putting things down, and I'll see something at the edge of the studio and think, oh yeah, and then all of a sudden that'll become a central part of something else, and I'll really carry it forward. But yeah, there's always things going on.
I was having an interesting conversation. I've got a friend who's a composer, and we were talking about making work and stuff. I mean, we sort of came up with the analogy of that if you want to catch a big fish, you have to go fishing, and you have to go fishing every day. So, you know, you just go. You can't talk about it. Talk about fishing, can you? And then hope that you'll catch a fish. You have to just sort of go every day, and you know, and then you have to go in different places, and then. So I just, you know, you just keep doing and sort of trust that you're on the right bus. And not get off.
And then just going to a lake.
I mean, just, you know, it's a bit of a mix of analogies, but just keep doing it. I think that goes back to kids making. It doesn't really matter what you're making.
Or why you're making it.
But just keep doing it, and keep, you know, if you can't make, if you don't have that thing in front of you, then draw in the, you know, just do something and just keep doing it, and then, you know, you'll end up somewhere pretty good. That's my kind of, that's, just trusting it and trusting making.
Marijke, what inspires you to keep going with ceramics? And
I think it's probably still what drew me to it in the first place is the objects themselves. And I think it was really, I kind of came from a design kind of 20th century decorative art background, and then got introduced to studio pottery, and it was instant kind of appreciation and just go, no, this is something I'm quite excited about. And then it was the collectors for us, because I think, being from an auction background, it was an unusual department because we had such a high level of private collectors who are buying and selling from us. I think over 95% of our clients are private collectors, and it's just the passion that they have for it, and it's infectious. And even kind of 15, 20 years on, it's still, having exciting conversations with people who know so much and are so passionate, and you're all learning from each other all of the time. And I think it just keeps fueling it. And it's finding that next pot hidden away that kind of gets unwrapped from a box, and a heart-stop moment of something that you've not seen before. And it's just that constant excitement of seeing these beautiful things passing through our hands. So... yeah.
What a lovely image.
That's lovely.
And on that note, I want to open it up to the floor in case there are any questions from either those of you in real life or any questions at all online from the panel. But yes, one
question.
Yes.
All of you have given so much for Firedup4. Marijke, you're providing the auction for it. Sonia, you've been here chairing it, and Barnaby and Rich, it's your second year donating a pot to Firedup4, so you're giving so much. I just wondered what it is. I think you've spoken about it throughout this discussion, but just briefly, what has really drawn you to Firedup4, and why is it different to any other initiative that you might have embarked on?
I think that for me personally, there's just something so incredibly gratifying about something that I've made, that I've thought about, that I've created, going on to be sold to raise funds to allow other people to do the same thing. And as I say, the moments I found, in just being lost in the moment, lost in the making, that kind of making for making's sake, and just being able to kind of escape everyday life. I value that so much, and I kind of really just hope that kind of the young people that come into the youth zones are able to kind of experience that and access that as well, and to be able to give a piece of work to allow to sort of help that to happen is just such a gratifying thing. I wish I could give all of my work away to make it happen. It just feels like such a positive and reaffirming thing.
Well, that's a really lovely thing to say.
But yeah, that's for me.
Kate's very infectious, isn't she? And she sort of tells such amazing stories, and the way, the passion that she talks about these centres, and, sort of individual stories where it's not just, we've had X amount of children come through and they've done this. It's when you hear, personal stories about how it's turned children's lives around. And, if that's not coming from, if that's not available to children, then it's so important that something like this, an alternative, is found and supported, because it's so incredibly important. It changes people's lives.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think having, knowing that just one ceramic centre, or one pottery, or one studio in one centre will give access to that to so many thousands of children for years to come. If I think back on how much I loved my Saturday morning club and doing that pottery, and it wasn't about what was made or where it was going to take me. It was just, as you said, being lost in the moment of making something, having this idea in the week of, I know what I'm going to make this week. It's really exciting, and looking forward to that, and having those opportunities. If you can give that to thousands of children and have that moment of positivity, that moment of achievement that those children can have, and if we can bring as many of these studios into as many of the youth centres around the country, then that's got to be an amazing achievement.
You know what's great as well is that they're not, you know, like the Saturday class that you went to, the Saturday class I went to, you know, my mum signed me up to go there, and, you know, she paid to go, you know, I went there, and it was a Saturday art class, but, you know, this isn't, this reaches people that aren't signed up, you know, that, you know, that don't have necessarily that infrastructure around them to, you know, realise that, oh, that's there, we'll sign you up, you can go to that. It's, you know, it's a walk in, and what is it, you know, and it's just, you know, it's so important, because that sort of by chance going there and discovering something is you know, it's super important.
Yeah, sometimes there's an idea that's so brilliant and so obvious. You sort of think, why has this not been done before? And I think, you know, for me, that's it with Firedup4. I was like, my goodness, like this is so needed right now, that it seems like such a great thing to be involved in right now. So to just say, there's another question. Thank you.
Sorry. I had a stroke, and I love art and everything, but how am I going to do ceramics with just one hand?
I mean, there's so many things you can do, and I would imagine perhaps it would probably be really beneficial. You know, there's something so lovely about the material, and it can be used at any, you know, in any kind of states. It doesn't have to be a hard kind of almost immovable lump. It could be much softer materials. There are kind of liquid clays you could kind of use as well to kind of create surfaces. You know, there are so many ways of sort of interacting with the material that it's just about finding a path that works for you and what you're able to do, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's not throwing on a wheel, you know. It's you know, although I've seen people throwing with their feet and their you know all sorts of things. So, but actually, it's really, as Rich said, you know, it's really accessible. There's moulds. There's you know, there's press moulding. There's, you know, there's just so, like, you know, there's so many different types of thing.
It's that accessibility, isn't it? Actually, it's really accessible to so many different people, regardless of any kind of physical constraints, or, you know, with these, if the youth centres have these studio potteries, you don't need to have the kind of financial means to do it. It's there and it's accessible, and people can access it. And get the benefits from it in any means possible.
Are there any questions from the online?
I have some questions from online.
Okay.
Firstly, we have Kate Malone, who has asked, Sonia, clay has so many ways of being in the home. What is your favourite clay piece in the museum of the home, and why?
Gosh, that's a hard one, because I've got so many favourites, it's hard to choose, but I'm probably going to steal Kate's own one. We've got these artichoke like custard cups from the 1700s, and they are just so exquisite. They're on display at the moment, and there's a set of them, and custards were kind of used in big meals to kind of cleanse the palate between. It's something that's gone very much out of fashion, but they're just so exquisite. They're a set. They're kind of just really, really beautiful pieces. So I'm going to steal that from Kate, because I know that there are some of her favourites as well.
I have another question from Karen, who works at Inspired Youth Zone. So, as someone who is lucky enough to work at Inspired Surely Youth Zone and witness every day the impact of your incredible donations. Oh, she's just saying thank you so much for your support. That was a question.
We'll take thanks.
And then we have another question from Paprika Williams. Thank you for your question. She said, we have a countrywide crisis of youth centres on the whole, not only ceramic access. So are we actually addressing a much bigger issue?
Well, I mean, these youth zones aren't just ceramics. No. I mean, they've got absolutely everything in them, haven't they? It's just, I think, what
I think what they were lacking was any kind of ceramic facility. I think,
I mean, maybe you guys know, but from what I've understood from Kate, they've got absolutely everything. They've got sports and
music,
and music and cookery and tech and computing and absolutely everything. Yeah. It's just what was lacking was making, which is what this is. Come to help, from what I understand.
Which is wonderful about ceramics being part of everyday life, both in the use but also in the making. Just part of who we are. But any other questions?
We've got one final question.
Excellent.
From Paolo. He's a Brazilian student designer, and he says, "I would like to ask how they see ceramics as an object of desire in a world that are more focused on digital stories. How can we create a narrative of ceramics to go beyond the object?" So how are these objects of desire in such a digital age? I think is what.
I think you touched on it earlier. I think there's a real.
It's almost a reaction to the digital age that I think is making them so appealing at the moment, and is the humanity of ceramics and pots that is almost a counterbalance to the digital.
And objects, But I think it can very much live in I don't know if in harmony is the right way of saying it, but in conjunction with, I think, no matter how digital we are, it's still, nice to have things and to kind of feel, have these objects, isn't it?
Yeah, they occupy very different spaces, I think, don't they? I mean, I went mudlarking recently and picked up a piece of what was a sort of a sugar cone, which was part of the kind of sugar purifying industry, and they were very kind of agricultural objects, and there was a fingerprint from where they'd obviously just kind of wired it off and picked it up, and that was a kind of a real tangible direct connection to someone 200 years ago that had made that object on a wheel. And you cannot get that through digital means. You can look at it, you can learn about it, you can get the history, but you don't have that
connection,
sense, that real connection. And that's what's so special.
Yeah, but I think the digital can be so enticing to the real. So we're seeing just from the photographs here the kind of glazes and that shine on some of them, or some of them appear so matte that you want to reach out and touch, don't you? So I think that the kind of digital as a kind of showcase for the real is definitely something.
Yeah, I think there's I think it's an interesting also crossover, probably not too far away. I mean, I wrote my thesis like 100 years ago on virtual art and virtual craft and stuff, and I still, I think it's. I don't know. I think
they're
it's
parallel things, and I think.
Well, I think at some point, VR touching, coming, it'd be interesting.
I saw a chap actually last weekend who sculpts 3D models on digital platforms for like computer games and things like that on a big tablet using tools. And actually his manual dexterity, when he transferred those skills over to actual real ceramic, real clay, real material, there were obviously very clear transferable skills.
I used the same thing.
And it was absolutely astounding. So I think the lines are constantly blurring more and more between the physical and the digital. But I think there's really interesting spaces in between, and
and definitely for design, and as we touched upon earlier, in industrial production as well. Like the digital is now absolutely sort of embedded in that in that world. So I think some useful crossovers. That was a great question. Are there any final questions? Oh yes.
Kate Malone again.
Yeah.
Richard, the TV programme has now been running for 5 years. It's starting to make an impact on the young. How about a junior throwdown? ? Followed by, what do you think the impact of the throwdown is on the young? And what would you hope it might do for them?
I just think it's kind of taking, again, much like the youth zones, where someone might step in to go and do boxing or something else, and they'll happen upon a ceramic studio and have the opportunity to use the material. I see the throwdown as the same thing. It's taking a process and a material into people's homes and catching them when they least expect it. You know, it's exposing that world of making to people who perhaps wouldn't necessarily access that ordinarily. And it might not be people may not be inspired to go and actually use the material, but they might have a better understanding about the objects that they're surrounded by and how they're used. They might become collectors or or participate in a greater way than they perhaps would have done if they hadn't seen it. So I just think it's been a really positive thing because of the very fact that it is mainstream and it is going out on a Sunday evening when you've got a captive audience. I just think it's presenting ceramics in a place that perhaps ordinarily wouldn't be, or certainly the processes. So yeah, I feel it's been really positive, and I feel really grateful to have been a part of that. And then you've got the potters that come on who are just the most incredible people, and I think are just passionate, enthused, and they just open themselves up to this whole experience of making in a very public arena, and I think people respond to that. You can't help but be inspired or moved by it. So yeah, I think there's loads going on there, but I think on the whole it's been a really positive thing because it is so mainstream. I think it's a format that's obviously tried and tested. But I just and you wouldn't necessarily think ceramics would be a good fit for that. But I just think it's done wonders for that. For, as I say, understanding of process and allowing people a little window into what it means to work with clay.
Right, wonderful. And I think on that inspiring note, I think I would urge everybody to look at the bidding for the Firedup4 auction. The bidding is now live.
Yep. Bidding open today.
Yes, open today. It concludes on Friday the 27th of May at 1 p.m.
Yeah.
Pots are available to view in person at MAAK's Gallery Space.
Yeah, so we'll be at 40 Ellen Street in Covent Garden from the 23rd to the 26th of May, the week after next. All the pots will be there on view, and bidding is on the MAAK website, so maaklondon.com. So come and have a look, see what's there, place some bids.
Brilliant, just do
raise
place
the
those
money.
bids. And then for further information on Firedup4, please go to www.firedup4.com, and there's a wealth of information about the wonderful work of the charity. So it just remains to thank everybody in the audience for your attentiveness and your brilliant questions, and then also to thank the wonderful panel for taking part in such rich discussion today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We also go hooray for clay.
Yeah.
After three.
All right.
1, 2, 3.
Hooray for clay!